Hi guys, Olive here today with a summer book haul. It turns out that even when I'm not actively seeking out new books, they somehow keep arriving. I will admit there was a trip to Half Price Books, and maybe also a library book sale, and then the Pittsburgh Book Festival was also a few weeks back, so I'm not exactly an innocent bystander here. But what can I say? When you live a bookish life, the books just seem to find you. So, let me show you the goodies that I've acquired. We'll begin with fiction, and first up, I have The Hotel by Elizabeth Bowen, which was originally published in 1927. I realized recently that I have been focusing so much on newer titles over really the entirety of my channel's history that I think I've been missing out on gems in the backlist. So I've been attempting to correct that. This is a step in that direction. And this just sounds fantastic. It involves gossipy British vacationers on the Italian Riviera. It sounds both elegant and tense, which I think this snazzy, sophisticated new cover captures really nicely. I think it also just screams summer. Keeping on that backlist track, I also picked up a copy of The Trick is to Keep Breathing by Janice Galloway, which is a Scottish novel from 1989, and in it we follow a young drama teacher as she begins to unravel following the death of her lover. And I first heard about this book because it shares a title with one of my favorite Garbage, like the band Garbage, songs. And that's not a coincidence. Shirley Manson was actually reading this novel when she wrote the lyrics to that song. And ever since I found that fact out, I've been wanting to read this book, compare it to the song, and see what they have in common. Then there's War for the Oaks by Emma Bull, which apparently is a foundational work of urban fantasy from the 1980s. And in it we follow a Minneapolis-based musician who somehow gets pulled into a war between competing fairy factions. It's definitely not my normal kind of book, but I've heard it's an oldie but goodie. I also picked up Catfish Rolling by Clara Komagi, which seems to blend Japanese myth, magical realism, grief, and time distortion, because in this novel there's an earthquake that cracks open time itself. I saw it at Half Price Books and it sounded so haunting and so strange that I felt like I needed to give it a good home. Spiegel and Growl also just very recently sent me a copy of Freya by Margaret Ann Tors. This is a suspense novel set in Iceland. It's due to come out in August. This book follows a single mother whose carefully rebuilt life begins to come undone when she is forced to confront what happened to her best friend who disappeared when they were children. There's also apparently a folklore element to this as well, which makes me even more curious to give it a try. And apparently I'm just in the mood for magical sounding books because I also picked up Neon Steel by Jennifer Maritza Macaulay, which is a short story collection set in Pittsburgh in the 90s and early 2000s. And I hear it has a little bit of everything. It's got comic book culture, anime fans, vampires, robots, indie rappers, magical realism in general. It's short. It's weird sounding. It's set here in Pittsburgh. It belongs in my house. I also found a Book of the Month Club edition of a novel called The Lightbreakers by Aja Gabel at Half Price Books. And I was curious about this because I read her novel The Ensemble years ago and I loved it at the time. So I was curious about this newer one, which seems to combine marriage, art, grief, quantum physics, possibly even some time travel in there as well. Apparently that's another recurring theme of this book haul. Whenever I do choose to read this, I am hoping that it sticks with me a little bit more than The Ensemble did. I love that book so much in the moment, but now I feel like I can barely remember it, which is rather unusual for me. Then at a library book sale, I grabbed a copy of Atomic Anna by Rachel Barenbaum, which is, say it with me, a time travel novel, but this one focuses on 3 generations of women who were trying to go back in time to prevent the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, but also repair their own family along the way. If you've spent time here on my channel, you probably know that I've read quite a bit about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, but I can never seem to read enough to fully wrap my mind around the absurdity, chaos, and absolute devastation of it. Not long after Love and Other Monsters by Emily Franklin appeared in one of my anticipated releases videos, her team actually reached out to me and offered to send me this hardback copy of the book, which I obviously very happily accepted. This is historical fiction that stars the often overlooked stepsister of Mary Shelley, but in this book, she's giving us her account of that famous summer in Switzerland that brought us Frankenstein. And I'm telling you, the moment it starts to get cooler outside, as soon as I can smell fall in the air, this book is first up. And to close out the fiction portion of this haul, I also got The Reservation by Rebecca Kaufman. It was also sent to me by the publisher. This book is set over one very chaotic day. A fancy Midwestern restaurant is preparing to receive a major literary guest when they discover that 22 ribeyes have been stolen. I love a good ensemble cast, which this book seems to have, and also ever since rereading Writers and Lovers by Lily King, which I reread in service of making my Heart the Lover review, I have just been jonesing for another novel that will take me inside the inner workings of a restaurant. I don't know why it does it for me, but it does. But that leads me into the nonfiction chunk of this book haul, and for the time being, we're going to stay in that food and beverage world, because the first book I want to show you is called Families of the Vine. Seasons Among the Winemakers of Southwest France by Michael S. Sanders. This is long-form reporting about 3 family-run wine farms in France. And for me, anything that has that Michael Pollan-esque mix of agriculture, food culture, and immersive reporting comes home with me. No questions asked. I also picked up Around the World in 80 Plants by Jonathan Drury, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a globe-trotting botanical tour through 80 different plants and their connections to all things human. I do love a good illustrated nature book, and there are tiny essays connected to all of the different illustrations, essays that I could dip in and out of. I feel like this is a good candidate for a nightstand book. But since we're on the topic of the natural world, I'll also say that my friend Steve was kind enough to send me 2 bird books. He knows that I am more than a little bit bird obsessed. So whenever he has spare copies of bird books, he knows I'm always happy to receive them. And one of the 2 that he sent my way this time is called Turning to Birds: The Power and Beauty of Noticing by Lily Taylor. And this is a very short collection of essays about how birding taught the author to slow down and notice all the life that was happening around her. So it seems like this is part memoir, part nature writing, part love letter to ordinary birds, which I already have a ton of fun watching out my kitchen window. And then the second bird book he sent me was actually one of my most anticipated releases of earlier this year. It's called The Book of Birds, A Field Guide to Wonder and Loss by Robert McFarlane and Jackie Morris. And this is a field guide, but in a much looser, more lyrical sense. It's not just how to identify birds, but how to identify with birds, so to speak, even just as a physical object. This book is gorgeous. I have had so much fun just looking at it, not even reading it. And when it first arrived, it opened up, no joke, on its own to the osprey chapter, to this gorgeous illustration, and I audibly gasped, because I spent a good chunk of the pandemic glued to an osprey nest cam in Florida. It's on Captiva Island. So the fact that this immediately went to the osprey, I feel like it was on a mission to charm me. And then there's a book called Under the Stars: How America Fell in Love with Camping by Dan White. And I have to admit to you right away, I am not a camper, at least at this point in my life. Never at any point in my life have I been a fan of camping. I was a terrible Girl Scout. And so this book might be working against some bad memories, churning up some not great emotions. But it did sound like a fun book. It's part history, part travelogue, part personal experiment with American camping culture. Maybe reading about camping will convince me to give it another try as a grown-up. I doubt it, but maybe. Spiegel and Grau were also kind enough to send me A Killing in Cannabis, a true story of love, murder, and California weed by Scott Eden. And this is an investigative true crime story about a wealthy Silicon Valley founder who got involved in California's cannabis industry and then was later abducted from his Santa Cruz home and was found murdered in the mountains. I saw one reviewer call this Dateline on steroids. I had no idea this was even coming out, so finding it on my doorstep was a very pleasant, albeit murdery, surprise. Next is an absolutely enormous tome of a book called Roll the Bones, The History of Gambling by David G. Schwartz, which is a sweeping history of gambling from ancient divination rituals to playing cards to casinos, organized crime, and the rise of Las Vegas as a current gambling mecca. I am not much of a gambler myself. I just don't really have a stomach for it. But I do have an interest in the practice of gambling. Like, why people do it is interesting to me. And also, I do love Las Vegas. Again, not really for the slots, much more for the shows and the food. However, the next trip I take there, this might need to come in my carry-on, if it will fit. Next, I got Thunderstruck by Erik Larson. And before I say anything else about this book, I have already read a book that covers very similar ground. I read Hallie Rubenhold's latest, A Story of a Murder, which talks about the Crippen murders. And that is also discussed in this book. However, I believe that Erik Larson also brings in the topic of the development of wireless communications. And then he shows how those two topics kind of came crashing together. So I know I will already have a lot of this information already under my belt, but I'm curious to see what he does with it. And also, I guess I'm kind of looking for an Erik Larson tiebreaker, because I did not love The Devil in the White City nearly as much as everyone else seems to, but I was very impressed by Dead Wake. So I just don't entirely know how to feel about this author yet, and I'm hoping reading this will help me figure that out. And when I said at the start of this video that the books just seemed to find me, I really wasn't being hyperbolic. I went into a building a couple months back on a completely non-book related errand, turned a corner, and there was a giant book sale. My jaw actually dropped. So I had to shop, and that's where I found The Man Who Was Dorian Gray by Jerusha Hull McCormack, which is a biography of the real-life man who is said to have inspired Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. It discusses everything from this man's friendship with Oscar Wilde to his later life as a priest. I don't know why Oscar Wilde is having such a moment on my channel in 2026, but I'm really digging it. Sticking with biographies, I also got Dorothy Parker, What Fresh Hell Is This? By Marian Mead. And Parker, of course, is the legendary wit of the Algonquin Round Table, but this biography also covers all of the sadness, the drinking, the politics, and the general mess behind all of her famous one-liners. Like many of you, I grew up with Gilmore Girls, and its creator, Amy Sherman Palladino, may be Dorothy Parker's #1 fan, and because of that, I have always meant to learn more about her. But speaking of women I have been long fascinated by, I also got Nellie Bly by Brooke Kroger, a big biography of her life as a pioneering investigative journalist, a world traveler, an overall professional badass. I very distinctly remember doing a big report on her in grade school. I've always been fascinated by her, and I know that she's also a Western Pennsylvania native, which definitely means a lot more to me now that I'm a Pittsburgher myself. And to round out this run of women making history, I also got a book called Before Amelia, Women Pilots in the Early Days of Aviation by Eileen F. LeBeau. Amelia Earhart is so famous that I feel like it's really easy to forget that she wasn't the first woman pilot, nor was she even necessarily the best of her era. And this book looks at all the women who flew before her or alongside her in the very dangerous early days of aviation, when even getting into one of those planes required some serious nerve. But moving on to another woman adjacent to someone famous, I also got a copy of Galileo's Daughter, a historical memoir of science, faith, and love by Dava Sobel. And despite this book's title, My research suggests that this book is much more a biography of Galileo himself, but it is partly told through the surviving letters that he wrote to his daughter, a cloistered nun who became one of his closest confidants. I have had some mixed results reading books by Dava Sobel, but this is one of her most popular ones, so I'm curious about it. Next is The Flying Carpet of Small Miracles by Hala Jabber. The author of this memoir was a foreign correspondent in 2003 when she was sent to Iraq. And this was during a time in her life when she was coming to terms with the possibility that she may never become a mother herself. But while she was there, she became involved in the lives of two very young girls who were the sole survivors of a missile strike that had killed their entire family. So this is a war memoir, but it's also a book about motherhood and grief and what happens when a journalist can't emotionally separate herself from the story that she's telling. Then I got a copy of The Violence, My Family's Colombian War by Adriana Ramirez. And full disclosure, before I say anything else, Adriana is a friend of a friend. I went to her book event here in Pittsburgh where I got this copy. It's there that I got to meet her for the first time. And then since then, we have hung out a little bit. So just wanted to make sure I put that out there. However, even if I didn't know her at all, I can tell you she is an amazing speaker. And in this book, she uses her family's story to discuss Colombia's decades of civil war, tracing how national violence can filter down into one family's stories and their survival. I am even more excited to read this now that I know her a little bit. I also got 1,000 Naked Strangers, a paramedic's wild ride to the edge and back by Kevin Hazard. And Kevin Hazard wrote a later book called American Sirens that I absolutely loved, which has only made me want to read this earlier book from him even more. It's his memoir of spending a decade working as a paramedic in Atlanta. I've heard that it's intense, funny at times, certainly very grim, about what you'd expect from a first responder memoir. Then there's 5 Days at Memorial, Life and Death in a Storm-Ravaged Hospital by Sherry Fink. This was another recommendation from my sister, who is a nurse. She's the one who recommended I read The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, and that ended up being one of my favorite nonfiction books of last year. So when she recommends that I read something, I listen. This is investigative journalism that discusses all of the terrifying things that happened inside a New Orleans hospital after Hurricane Katrina. I'm sure it's going to be brutal, but so important. And a quick side note. I understand why publishers do this water-stained effect on covers sometimes. Certainly it makes sense given the topic of this book. But personally, as someone who buys the majority of their books used, I hate when they do it because I can never tell if I'm getting a damaged book or if I'm just being gaslit by graphic design. And the final book in this haul is called Empire of Skulls by Paul Staub. This was also sent to me by the publisher, and it also has one of those, is this water damaged or is this intentional kind of covers that hurt my brain so much. But the book itself sounds pretty interesting. It's a history of phrenology, the family who helped to popularize it, and how this supposedly scientific system of self-improvement became all tangled up with reform movements, celebrity culture, racism, and some very American fantasies surrounding progress. So those are all of the books that have come into my life lately through no fault of my own. Obviously. If you're interested in checking out any of these books, I have listed and linked all of them for you in the description box below. And at the very bottom of that exact same description box, you'll also see links to where you can find me around the internet. Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I am reading and doing right now. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.